10. Elizabeth Afton. Elizabeth is at the top of this list because, well, she got killed, but she also doesn't really seem to deserve it until after she gets killed, and then she deserves the spring locking, which, I mean, in a way makes sense, and it's something that I've been using as evidence when it comes to who I think the vengeful spirit is, because, you know, spirits, when they're, you know, being spirits for longer periods of time, would understandably start to go crazy, or even crazier, and this is an idea that Supernatural, the show, has used in length, and the same idea, though, could be applying to Elizabeth and Crying Child. Just because you start off good or loving your father doesn't mean that you'll continue to see things that way in a few years' time. And Elizabeth, while not deserving a spring locking in 1983 when she dies, definitely deserves one come sister location in FNAF 6. I mean, she literally betrays her brother and sister location, nearly killing him, and then, again, she also betrayed him, and then in FNAF 6, she wants to make her father proud. Her murderous, psychopathic father. She wants to make him proud. Considering how you've been possessing an animatronic that he made that caused you to die, that he made, I think that you would have already made him pretty proud, I guess. It's a damn shame that you turned into this, but whatever. In at 9, Mr. Hippo. Okay, this is kind of a joke number, but also not, because Mr. Hippo is literally the worst thing ever in Ultimate Custom Night. Mr. Hippo is a viable animatronic from FNAF 6 that returns as an antagonist in Ultimate Custom Night. Okay, Mr. Hippo will climb through the duct systems trying to reach one of the 2 hoses in the office. Hoses? Is that right? I don't know. I just copied and pasted that line from the wiki. The player needs to use an audio lure to keep him in place and to move him around so that they can use the heater to push him back, and he is fooled 100% of the time by the audio lure. Also is fooled faster than Helpy Frog. However, most of the scare factor from this animatronic doesn't come from their behavior or their design. This time around, rather, their death lines. Cause you see, Mr. Hippo has a knack for going on about things. A lot. Okay, it's like me on a first date. Still, he will go into like 5-minute long speeches that you have to deal with every time he kills you. Meaning that if you get jump scared, you're boned for enough time to make a sandwich, okay? Which is annoying as hell. Getting killed by him enough will eventually and cause you to end up agreeing with me that he needs to be spring locked. Because you end up knowing what comes after the smoke of the jump scare clears, and it's just pain. In at 8, Roxy. Okay, I know that Roxy and Mr. Hippo are animatronics and incapable of actually feeling pain because of a spring locking, but honestly, I also just hate this kind of person. The self-centered tool bag who only cares about themselves, whether they secretly hate themselves or not, that's not what matters here, okay? Who you are and what kind of person you are is defined by how you treat others and who you are when the pressure is on. And Roxy is just horrible. And while they may not be able to feel pain from the spring locking, at least Roxy will be contained if they got spring locked, okay? And honestly, that's what I need. I don't want to deal with this personality type. I've dealt with enough people like this throughout my life, and I'm still only 22 goddamn years old, which means that I'm really fed up with this shit. So yeah, there's not much else to say with this one other than I want her to be restrained so that I don't have to deal with her. So yeah, that's it. That's the number. What are you still doing here? Go to the next one. And it's 7, Cassidy. Some say that Cassidy was spring locked, but honestly, there isn't really much evidence for that. But you know what? If she wasn't, she damn well deserves to be. And why, you ask? How could a little girl who got killed and then go on to possess the killer so he could suffer for all eternity deserve such a fate as a spring locking? Well, exactly for the reason you listed. Because everyone thinks that Cassidy is the vengeful spirit, aka the one you should not have killed, aka the one who possesses Afton to make him suffer. But when you look at it, logically, taking into consideration more than just what Matt Patton says, it would make more sense for Crying Child to be the vengeful spirit. But nobody wants to listen to me. Nobody wants to hear even my suggestions because of Cassidy. The amount of hate that I've gotten in the comments, in my DMs, on TikTok for God's sakes, is more than I have gotten for anything else. Even more than I got for suggesting that Michael was a Crying Child robot. Just because William didn't kill Crying Child directly does not mean that he couldn't possibly blame the man who made the robot and gave it enough power to crush a skull for his death. Because, you know, that wouldn't normally be required. Plus, Cassidy only has significance because you think she's the vengeful spirit. Take that away, and what importance does she have? Exactly. So, just for that, and for hardly anyone being willing to even hear me out, Cassidy damn well deserves it. Honestly, she could be higher on the list, but I wanted to rant about other people a little bit more. So yeah, there you go. And at 6, FNAF cops. The cops in the FNAF universe are absolutely the most moronic bunch of people I have ever, I guess, not seen, but heard of, honestly. Like, yeah, I get that they couldn't catch William for story purposes, but that seemingly was retconned, since in the first game they said that they had made an arrest. They could have ended it right there. The story could have been over, but they couldn't find the bodies, so they let him go. Yeah, ignore the animatronics that smell like death, are leaking blood and other bodily fluids, and that many parents have compared to reanimated corpses. Those don't have anything to do with this scenario. Yeah, totally. And even when they find baby's blueprints and see that she has a child storage tank, they don't do anything more than question him. Quote, "There's no doubting what you've achieved on a technical level. These are clearly state of the art. There are just certain design choices that were made for these robots that we don't fully understand. We were hoping that you could shed some light on those." Dude, arrest him! And search the bloody, rotten body smelling animatronics. God damn it, how hard is this? Okay, if it's a crime scene or a suspected crime scene, come on, if it's a crime scene, you don't need to have a warrant, for fuck's sakes, okay? They all deserve spring lockings for the sheer stupidity alone. I'm surprised that they didn't crawl into one and then get killed by it just because they're that damn stupid. Halfway through into number 5, William Afton. William is at number 5 because, well, he absolutely did deserve to be a Springlock victim, but he also actually was, and seemingly is the only one who actually was on this list. But, like, for real, this man deserved what he got in more ways than one. Seriously. He was a mass murderer who would have gotten a lethal injection anyway, but also the technician that made the suits, the man that handles the suit maintenance on the daily, and is absolutely explained to every single employee that has put one of these fuckers on the proper procedure for the Springlock suits. Mostly for tax and liability reasons, probably, okay? But including the Spring Bonnie suit that he uses to kill people, okay? Then he gets inside one without thinking and somehow doesn't notice the moisture in the room, the leaking ceiling causing the Springlocks that were active at this moment to fail and just fill him full of metal, okay? But like, it's your building, my guy. How are you not painfully aware of the leaking ceiling in this back room? Really, like how? How do you not know? Seriously, somehow this lucky motherfucker managed to get possessed by someone that he killed who was so pissed at him that they kept him alive for all of his other supposed to be deaths. Because they wanted William to suffer. Like, god damn it. No matter who it is, whether you believe it was Crying Child or Cassidy, despite there being a more logical conclusion when you don't just blindly listen to MatPat, like, why? Why couldn't you just let him die? I get that you want him to suffer, okay, obviously. I mean, I put him on this list. I wanted him to be spring-locked. But, like, doing that results in him killing more people. So why? Why would you do that? In it for Vanessa. I feel like this one is kind of obvious, and you may get mad at me for saying this, but Vanessa deserves to be spring-locked, man, okay? You're probably thinking, but she's possessed, you moron. She doesn't have control over her actions. But that's the thing. She does. Vanessa has no willpower to sacrifice herself for the greater good, okay? At this point, I think that it's safe to infer that Jeremy from FNAF VR didn't go crazy because he just saw a glitch trap. It's fairly reasonable to say that he got possessed. Tape Girl hadn't broken glitch trap into the tapes yet, and he was probably just able to possess whoever he wanted. So if Jeremy did get possessed, and the possession worked in a similar way that it does with Vanessa, which would make sense, Jeremy would at times be sentient and in control of his own body. So if he knew about glitch trap, maybe he didn't cut his face off because he was freaking out like he had just taken like the Epsom salt because you use it in the bath. Maybe he did it to try and kill the monster that was inside of him, okay? So if Vanessa had the gall, Afton wouldn't really have a vessel, okay? Especially since the VR game at this point was probably abandoned. But she won't. But she won't do it. So she deserves to be spring-locked. Getting close to the end into number 3, Gregory. The way I see it, Gregory is such a stuck-up little shit that he would absolutely deserve to be crushed by metal robotic bits being put in the same places as Bones, because this kid is just a damn menace that seemingly doesn't want to take responsibility for any of his actions. And you know what? None of you hold him accountable either. Gregory orders the robots to disassemble Vanny. Quote, okay? Gregory being willing to kill Vanny is already pretty messed up, but while some would argue self-defense, this is not self-defense. Self-defense requires a reasonable amount of force to be used, okay? Tearing a person limb from limb is not reasonable force. This kid is easily able to destroy all 3 animatronics without a moment's hesitation and then use their upgrades on Freddy. He is willing to kill Vanny, like I said, despite actually seemingly knowing her like we see in the best ending, and then he burns Burn Trap multiple times in an attempt to stop him from taking control over Freddy, but again, he's also just setting fire to this thing all the time. So like, what the absolute living hell is this kid doing? And how is he so nonchalant about this whole thing? Okay, this guy literally kills Vanny and then only gets emotional when he has to go talk to a destroyed Freddy robot that they can remake. Dude, Vanny's literally bleeding out right next to you. I'm sure that her ribs are just splayed across the floor. Dude, couldn't you have just said like stop Vanny or restrain Vanny? Stop Vanny would have been the easiest one, not freaking disassemble. Okay, you're not panicking about literally anything else in this game. Okay, just say something that doesn't involve a human dying, for God's sakes, okay? Stop Vanny! Dude! Penultimately, in number 2, Henry. Yes, I'm going to continue the Henry hate train. Choo choo, get on board, motherfuckers, because despite how many people try and defend him, I will never stand down. I don't get what Henry's deal is, because he does not kill William at any point in the series, aside from trying to make it look like a fire did it. But William is already considered dead. How would you killing him make things suspicious? So why would you try to cover it up with a fire? For some reason, okay, he seems to be fine offing William's son when he gets the chance though. I mean, in both of the fires that Henry has set that we see, FNAF 3 and FNAF 6, Michael was there both times. And he didn't seem to care that Michael was in the building either time, okay? He doesn't even give Michael the opportunity to leave in FNAF 6 despite there having been a way out planned. Quote from Henry's final speech. "And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you. Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be." You have a feeling? What are you, the black eye frickin' peas? He assumes that we also want to die in these halls, but doesn't give us the chance to actually make that decision for ourselves. He just forces us to die, since he doesn't give us a way out. Okay? That's murder! Whether we wanted it or not. Okay, assisted suicide is still illegal in the majority of states, I'm pretty sure, okay? But even then, not giving us the choice, even just assuming that we want it, makes it a murder. Instead of like having the fire burn the building down, or having Baby lob his head off, okay? He should have had to suffer a Springlock failure just so that he could see how easy it would have been just to off Afton directly instead of trying to do it like a coward. And finally, in at number 1, Michael Afton. Michael Afton absolutely, in my mind, deserves to have gotten Springlocked instead of simply burning in FNAF 6, okay? Like, sure, he seems to be playing the good guy, going after his father, but in reality, Michael, to me, he's just playing the hero this whole time and not actually doing anything. He says he's trying to right his father's wrongs and whatnot, but even Oliver Queen did more than that, okay? He's not doing it because he's a good person. He's doing it because he feels bad and not because of, like, some higher moral code. He blames himself for getting his brother killed, which I mean is understandable, but then that subsequently means that anything he does to try and like fix the things that his father did is just to make himself feel better about his own mistakes. Because in the end, nothing is gonna bring his little bro back, okay? And he doesn't even really have the stomach to actually stop his father once and for all. He says that he's going to come find him, but then when he does in FNAF 6, he doesn't burn down the place to stop him, okay? Henry does that. Henry is the only one who's actually willing to sack up and try to stop William, even if he does it in a cowardly way, okay? It just shows how not serious Michael is. And if he really wanted to make sure that William was dead, he wouldn't have let himself burn in the FNAF 6 fire, okay? But he does. He lets himself burn, or at least doesn't actually successfully get out of the building, so that he won't have to feel the regret of hurting his brother anymore, okay? Because he has the curse of knowledge, since he knows what his father was doing, and he doesn't want to deal with it anymore. And you know what? That deserves a spring locking. That's right. I don't care how mad at you are at me in the comments. comments, okay? I don't care. It's true, alright? It's Monday morning, I'm mad. And at 10, William Afton. Again, could William have suffered a springlock failure before getting trapped in the spring bodysuit like we see in FNAF 3? It's possible, and it certainly appears like that's the case in the FNAF novels, since William is described to have scars that are consistent with the springlock failure before becoming Springtrap in the novels. So could it have happened in the games? Could William have been the reason the springlock suits were retired? Since we hear of an unfortunate incident at the sister location, so is that unfortunate incident William? There are plenty of people it could be, but William having to deal with it would certainly get them put out of commission for a time. But with William continuing to use the suit and putting it on when the room was wet like we see in FNAF 3's cutscene, it suggests that that's probably unlikely, but it's still possible. So since this list is possible springlock victims, I think he deserves to be on this list, at least at number 10, since can we really talk about springlock victims without mentioning good old Willie Afton? Exactly. And at 9, Henry Emily. Now this is certainly an interesting case, because seemingly Henry has died multiple ways across FNAF canons, with his first apparent death being in FNAF World at the hands of Baby. His death in the novels seems to have happened before Silver Eyes starts, and then he dies in FNAF 6 along with everything else. But could one of these deaths involve the springlock failure, or something having to do with springlocks? I mean, maybe Afton offed Henry in one of these realities, or maybe Baby has some springlock mechanisms inside her when she killed Henry. Hell, maybe Henry just climbed into the wrong suit at the wrong time. It's a question that we don't really pay attention to because, well, Henry's death doesn't mean much to the story, unfortunately, but it's still true. Henry dying doesn't really mean much to the overall FNAF lore, and we didn't even know he was alive until FNAF 6, so maybe for irony's sake, Scott had him bite the dust in a quicker way, rather than just, burning alive, because that sucks. Maybe he wanted to prevent himself from even more severe agony so that he didn't possess something. And at 8, Phone Guy. Phone Guy's death is one of the most mysterious deaths of all. We hear him die in FNAF 1 on night 4 with the sound of multiple animatronics banging on his doors, but we never really get an explanation as to what happens to him. We know he dies, but other than that, it's all speculation. One of the theories though is that animatronics got him and shoved him into a suit, resulting in a very painful death, especially since at this point the springlock suits were either still in operation or hadn't been totally removed. The actual timeline of the events of the springlock suits is a little messy since we don't really have years for things like them getting scrapped, yet it's still possible that Phone Guy was shoved into one or maybe used it to hide. After all, maybe Phone Guy is secretly William Afton and Scott just didn't want us to know that yet or something. I still feel like that might have been in the realm of possibility. Maybe not now, but it was. And at 7, Michael Afton. This relies on heavy speculation and assumption. However, if the entered enema is truly what killed Michael's body, then could it be considered a spring locking? We don't really know if the Funtime animatronics have spring locks, but we can assume that they do thanks to their moving parts and abilities like a giant claw that goes out and stores items. But this would also mean that Ennard would have at least some of those same parts. So if the Funtime animatronics that were made around the same time as the original Springlock animatronics used similar parts or techniques, which is likely, that means that Michael Afton would also be a springlock victim. We don't need solid proof since this is a possible springlocking victims list, so proof of possibility is all I really need. And honestly, I think that this would provide a good explanation as to why he turned purple. Since people who die don't turn purple. Instead, if they rot, they would most likely be depicted as green, especially when another major character is linked to the color purple. So, if that is indeed bruising, it would make sense if the springlock mechanisms were hurting him from the inside out. And at 6, Bite of 87. The Bite of 87 is such an infamous incident that I can already hear people groaning in the comments. However, what if the victim of the Bite of 87, whoever that actually was a victim of a springlock failure? It could make sense, since the animatronics had no harmful tendencies before this, so a springlock failure is a reasonable assumption as to why someone got a frontal lobe removed. And a springlock failure, assumingly, would definitely provide enough power to do that, since the springlocks themselves would snap with such ferocity, and would probably circumvent the whole needing more power to do that thing. And if it was Jeremy, it would explain why the animatronics were suspended, because now one of their employees was bit and they had to promote him and fork over some extra cash to make sure that he didn't sue. So overall, whoever the Bite of 87 victim is could definitely have been a springlock victim. Halfway through into number 5, Shadow animatronics. One of the oldest theories is that the shadow animatronics are the first Springlock victims. This comes to us after the FNAF 3 phone guy dialogue that mentioned multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures, which some interpreted as multiple Springlock suits failing at once, since the term Springlock in this situation is used to describe the suit as a whole and the individual Springlock mechanisms that hold back all the robotic parts in the suit. So the line of multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures could mean multiple of the Springlocks inside the suit failing at the same time, or more than one suit failing at the same time. This led some to theorize that previous employees were killed in the Springlock suits, which is where the shadow animatronics came from. This is supported by the fact that these shadows are of Freddy and Bonnie, the two animatronics that have Springlock versions. And while there are holes in this theory, there is potential that this is the case. So the shadow animatronics are possible Springlock victims. I'm gonna have to keep saying that because people in the comments are gonna get mad. It's like, oh, they weren't Springlock. They could have been. It's possible, and that's the list, okay? And at 4, Cassidy. Cassidy is the most mysterious victim in the missing children's incident. Her name was hidden for years, only really being discovered recently, and honestly we don't know too much about her. We don't know how she died, so the potential is there for her to be a Springlock victim. Maybe William knew that it would be easier that way. After all, she does possess Golden Freddy, who we figured was a Springlock suit, that ended up having the guts removed, hence the slumped overness. However, if this was the case and Cassidy's body was in that suit, they would have found it when they were gutting him. But maybe William was the one who gutted it, considering how he was the suit technician. And I mean, like, to be fair, for a suit technician, he did miss a fatal flaw with the animatronics that he literally designed, since, you know, he got snapped when the suit was wet. Either way, Cassidy being a Springlock victim would help explain a lot in the series. Just, you know, the hallucinations and whatnot. Getting close to the end in number 3, Kelsey. Kelsey is in essence the main antagonist of the Fazbear Fright story, the new kid from the third Fazbear Frights book 1:35 AM. Kelsey had just moved to town and ends up making friends with the protagonist Devin. Devin ends up getting jealous of how much everyone loves Kelsey, so he hatches a plan with his friend to trap him in a Springlock suit for a few hours. However, when they unleash their plan, the Springlock suit fails and kills Kelsey. At least, so they thought. Since a week later, Devin returns to make sure Kelsey is still there, for some reason, only to find a different body in the suit. He knows that it's someone else because the hair color is different, and then Devin gets stuck and bleeds out, only for the story to cut back to Kelsey meeting 2 more kids at his new school. This is an interesting story because while Kelsey did get Springlocked, he ended up being fine. So what happened? Some think that Kelsey is a ghost, while some think that he's the one you should not have killed. But no matter what, we all feel like there is a high possibility that Kelsey was a Springlock victim, at least when they were alive. We don't know how and we don't know when, but it's a definite possibility. And ultimately, in at number 2, missing children. Much like the Cassidy situation, the entirety of the missing children involved in the missing children's incident may have been Springlock victims. We're still unsure as to the method of extermination that William used on the screaming pests. Sorry, the kids who run around in my building hallways they're still getting to me. If they ever go missing though, these videos are not going to help me. Anyway, we don't know how William dispatched of these kids before shoving them into the suits, and honestly there may not be a way that he killed them before shoving them in. The act of putting them in the suits may very well have been what killed them, which would make sense given that a Springlock incident would be more agonizing than a simple knife to the chest. And a Springlock collapse would be a more realistic way for the suits to start leaking blood and other fluids, since one knife wound wouldn't really do that, especially around their eyes. Even if the suits didn't like snap closed, if William shoved them into the suits, that's close enough for me. Finally, and at number 1, crying child. Okay, now this one is going to be controversial, but there is no way that I could do this list without mentioning one of the greatest debates in my DMs ever. The amount of people who message me on Instagram not asking about my game's Kickstarter, but rather the bite of 83 and how it had to have been a Springlocking bothers me to my core. I say this every time I'm bringing it up. I don't think that this was a Springlock failure. That being said, it's still possible, and that's what this list is about. The reason I don't think it was a Springlock failure is because the Fredbear suit was already in animatronic mode, meaning no Springlocks would have a chance of failing. Since, keep in mind, a Springlock failure refers to the Springlock mechanism failing to stay open, meaning it snaps back into animatronic mode. That's why it's bad if someone is inside, and there would be no Springlock mechanism in and around the mouth because it would always be in animatronic mode, since the jaw just moves up and down. But nevertheless, it's still a possibility, since logic and physics doesn't seem to apply to the FNAF world, which is made evident by those goddamn doors from FNAF 1. Even if they're electromagnet, they would still be open with power, so if they ran out of power, they would end up closing. Just saying. And at 10, moisture sensitive. one of the things that I find to be the absolute dumbest thing about not only these damned suits, but also the FNAF series in general, is how stupid it is that the springlock mechanisms inside the springlock suits fail with moisture. Sure, it explains why William gets springlocked because the room was dripping and whatever, the ceiling was leaking, and it makes everyone confused with Crying Child because he was crying. Despite that not being a springlock failure, everyone thought it was because he was crying and, you know, moisture. But in actual practice, that is a horribly flawed mechanic. Like, if me breathing and sweating is going to make the metal bits snap on me, why would I do it in a hot robotic suit? That seems like a horrible and stupid idea. Like, yes, okay, put me in a hot and sweaty environment that gets me killed if it gets wet. That's not a liability at all. I get sweaty wearing my freaking Doctor Strange costume, okay? Imagine a giant suit full of metal, okay? That would also be heavy as hell to walk around in too, only making the sweating worse. In at 9, designer. You see, there are a decent amount of people that for some reason think that these springlock suits were made with pure intentions. By William Afton. This kind of goes hand in hand with the idea that William started killing after losing his kids, but we know that that's not the case. Since thanks to the fast facts found in FNAF AR's files, we know that the Funtime animatronics were some of the first ones ever made, and considering the abilities of Baby and her comrades, we know that they were made in order to kill, meaning that even if the Springlock animatronics were the very first animatronics ever, it's reasonable to assume that they were also designed with death in mind, which explains multiple things. But honestly, if William made the Funtimes with death in mind, it's likely that he did the same with the Springlocks, you get me? And if you think that a suit that can snap at a moment's notice and shove pounds of metal, bars, cogs, gears, and chains and more into the same space as your body would be made with pure intentions, you should stop watching these videos and go to a therapist. Seriously. I have a number. In at 8, no bonus. The springlock mechanism is probably the most intuitive thing that FNAF's world invented. The ability to move robotic parts out of the way enough for a human to fit inside is nuts. And while it may be dangerous, we also drive over 100 kilometers or miles, whatever, per hour in huge metal death boxes, so we can't necessarily complain about it. And while yes, they have their faults, there is nothing compared to the ability to be both animatronic and suit. That's an incredible feat of technology, and I'm sure they play into it with the marketing. Like, I mean, we hear the Foam Guy tapes from FNAF 3 talking about these things, okay? And he never mentions a bonus or anything like that for you risking your life with one of these damn suits. And even if you end up getting springlocked, there doesn't really seem to be any compensation package for your loved ones. Hell, if you die, you may not even get your severance. Actually, maybe that's why they do it. Your family can file a lawsuit since, you know, you died on the job, but that's a lengthy court battle against a massive company with a serial killer who has yet to be caught at the front lines. It's not really gonna do much good for your fam. So the fact that you don't get a bonus if you get in one of these suits, let alone get spring-locked, no thanks. It's a red flag. Swipe left. And it's 7, required. The springlock suits themselves are an occupational hazard that they didn't really need to create. Like, these things are hella deadly, and both William and Henry allow for their employees to wear them. Like, goddamn, okay? Just make a separate suit for the animatronic characters, for the employees, okay? Like, the people who run your business. You know, they are the ones who make you the money, so, you know, they don't end up dying from robotic parts replacing their internal organs. OSHA would have been all over these goddamn suits if it was real in this universe, but apparently I guess it's not. And honestly, it's probably required by your contract to wear these suits at work. And if you refuse, you're probably gonna get fired, especially considering how they started getting ready to fire Jeremy because he saw Glitch Trap in Help Wanted. So why wouldn't they fire you for not wearing your suit if it's in your contract? Even if you claim it was to protect your life, they'd find another reason that you couldn't really fight against, so. Especially, you know, when a serial killer is the CEO. And at 6, implications. Now, while the term springlock is used in real life, it's totally different from the actual FNAF mechanism. I'm certain most of you got the whole springlocks are real line from Springlocks and You, How Not to Die Remastered. It's a thread on the FNAF wiki. However, actual springlocks are just locks that use springs, okay? From my research, what I gathered is that a springlock in real life is, in simplest terms, a spring lock. It's like if your front door's deadbolt was on a spring. Every other instance talking about real spring locks just ends up bringing you back or quotes this page. So it's kind of circular logic, okay? You can't use evidence within the thing that you're trying to prove as proof that it is real. It's like plugging a power bar into itself. It doesn't work. You can't use the same article to prove that Springlocks are real, okay? Because they're not. At least their game form isn't. But if the Springlock failure was real, I think the implications of like all of this being real in general is like one of the worst things. You get it? Like it's definitely in the top 10. Get it? It's a little meta content joke for you because this is a top 10 list. It's in the top 10. Halfway through into number 5, comments. I've mentioned this in previous videos, mostly to explain why there won't ever be an actual real FNAF restaurant that you'll be able to walk into, and it still remains true since we're only getting a virtual diner that you can only order online. However, I think that one of the worst things still, and especially when it comes to these suits, is the goddamn comments about them. You want to know a comment that I saw yesterday? Well, yesterday for me as I was writing this, Wednesday for you. Okay, I saw someone say that they want to be springlocked. What? Why? Why would you want to be springlocked? Do you know how messed up that is? You're saying that you want to be killed by this thing? Because there's some hotlines that you should call. Like, why on sweet heaven's earth would you want to be springlocked? Do you know how absolutely agonizingly painful that would be? That would be one of the worst things imaginable, okay? Holy sweet Lord baby Jesus W. Christ. That would be one of the worst ways to go, if not the worst way. At least like as far as like actually could happen goes, I think at least, okay? Because like a volcano would suck, but it's a bit unrealistic. It's a bad idea, okay? Stop doing this. Stop saying this. Okay, talk to a doctor. And for Afton, I talked about how the implications would apply to like how everything in FNAF would have happened in real life if one of these was real, but one of the worst implications would be that Afton was real. This man has caused me enough pain and suffering already. I don't need him to be like an actual person, especially considering how Springtrap would be set loose next year. And then everything after it would happen. This channel would probably be a true crime channel and not a gaming channel. I'd probably have tried proving it myself and maybe even become a PI so that I can do so. But straight up, this man has already caused me enough grief and suffering and loss and tears of pain at night in my life, and it's made me lose enough of it already to him. So yeah, him being real would just be the worst thing that I can imagine for me. However, that's only if the Springlock failure thing was also real. There are worse things for people in the FNAF universe though, not in real life, such as in at 3, paperwork. One of the worst things for the survivors after a Springlock failure has to be the paperwork that is associated with it, because goddamn, someone dying in your building is one thing. Someone dying in your building because of something in your building is another, and then add on to that the fact that they were your employee and probably forced into that suit without because of their contract, and you'll be filing reports until you have to retire. Okay, especially because one mistake on those papers means like even more paperwork, and I don't really know anyone who likes to do paperwork. Personally, I hate it, but that's also because my ADHD makes me it makes it unbearable for me, honestly. Like, it's even tough to write scripts sometimes, but I mean, eventually I have to, but like that's where my brain thrives, you know, in that stressful environment, which is not good for my health. But if it was that kind of paperwork, I would honestly just quit, because there is no way in hell that I would even want to attempt to keep my focus on that when I can just scroll through TikTok or YouTube instead. So yeah, no thanks. But ultimately in at number 2, replaced. Oh yeah, don't forget your bones being replaced with metal ones. Yeah, like sure, there's surgery for people who need repairs or replacements, okay? I think like hip replacements are probably the most common actually. However, those have whole processes behind them to ensure a fast recovery and, you know, survival, not being infected. All of a sudden being shoved full of metal bones where normal ones used to be, that's a guaranteed infection at the very least, especially considering how, you know, your normal bones have to go somewhere else. And whether they're just crushed and then spread out inside you or just pushed out the other side, you're going to be in a hell of a lot of pain. Plus, you know, probably not alive, which I guess is a good thing. since you won't really have to deal with the intense pain for too long, hopefully. But this actually makes me think, if you replace all of your bones with metal ones, are you still you? Is this like a Ship of Theseus moment? Am I about to have like a WandaVision finale? Or like, are we just our brain? And if we are our brain, does that mean that if we have a brain transplant, do we become another person despite it still being my body? And does that mean that we're just like a brain piloting a bone mech with meat armor? Oh no, existential crisis! And finally, in at number 1, death. I mean, don't get me wrong, okay? But the worst thing about a Springlock failure has to be the whole death part, right? Ignore my mumbling. I mean, honestly, okay, it's obviously not for some of you, given the whole comments thing earlier, but the only reason you wouldn't die in a Springlock suit is because you're a main character and need to be around for the story. And then you're just in agonizing pain for the rest of your life. Yeah, the only people who have survived a Springlock failure, well, confirmed, is William. So, yeah, and you know, he's like the main antagonist of the game and was only able to survive since the spirit of a victim was keeping him alive. And in the books, William also ended up getting springlocked before, but then got out of the suit, since Dave Miller, who was revealed to be William, has scars from a previous Springlock failure from before he becomes Springtrap in the books. So the only one who can ever really survive seems to be William, and he's survived it twice. Anyone else is boned, and personally, I'd rather not die by having millions of small metal bits and several dozen large ones shoved into my body, trying to replace my body. I would rather die peacefully in my sleep with Chica's hand around my throat. And at 10, Grim Chica. The first Springlock victim in the Final Night series, Grim Chica is a primary antagonist in Final Nights 3 Nightmares Awoken. Unlike the others, she is not a Reaper animatronic. Grim Chica holds a strong appearance to the Springlock suit on the poster for the Night 3 cutscene, but her face plates are very hard to spot. And she's also almost entirely purple. The glowing accents inside of her resemble a human corpse. She lacks a bib unlike the original Chica. Her overall body is very slim like the original toy Chica, except for her hips, which appear to be much wider for birthing purposes. And she lacks shoulders or upper arms, with her forearms protruding from her armpits. Grim Chica is also revealed to be a Springlock victim in the museum levels, saying, quote, "A victim of a Springlock failure, forever forced to haunt the suit she was wearing. Now being manipulated by your sister and mother. Tried spray on tan, still very pale." I relate to that. No matter what I do, I'll always be pale and pasty, okay? But I'm fine with that. However, while she is also a Springlock victim, she's in the suit that she was wearing, therefore she is a Springlock animatronic, alright? So, I'm like, come on. I mean, I'll also be like, what did you do to my girl Chica? Like, I'm sorry, Mommy Kentucky. I didn't mean to. These are transgressions. Keep my wife's name! And at 9, Grim Fredbear. Grim Fredbear is one of the antagonists of Final Nights 3 Nightmares Awoken. He is only active on Night 5 and is found in the left hallway. Grim Fredbear resembles the normal golden Fredbear, only with his suit glowing a deep purple color while the interior of the suit glows a bright white. His upper face appears to be torn off, including his eyes, leaving an empty, hollow, gaping hole in its place. That sounded weird. The inside of the mask, though it appears like there is nothing inside, actually conceals a white, pale human head that can only be seen during his jump scare. And before you ask, yes, it's mine. This animatronic is clearly meant to be a reference to Shadow Freddy and the theory that these Shadow animatronics were Springlock victims, which is later confirmed by Scott to be false when stating that only William was a victim of a Springlock failure. But in the museum level of this game, which unlocks after Night 5, it is also revealed that Grim Fredbear is a Springlock suit, saying, quote, "Another Springlock failure victim, the second generation of Fredbear." And at 8, Golden Call. As a human when alive, Golden Call's name was Kyle. However, now he is a Springlock victim stuck inside a Golden Freddy Springlock suit. Golden Call has the typical run-down Springlock suit vibe, similar to Springtrap. However, this is much more gruesome. His left ear is bent, he has bugs coming out of basically every hole in the body, human eyes are hanging out of the animatronic's eye sockets, just dangling there, like my grandfather's tie. He's missing an exosuit on his right foot, and the character is holding a flesh-colored, at least flesh-colored, it might even be flesh-made phone in his right hand that stays stuck to his head via more flesh and blood strands connecting it. Yeah, it's gross. It's a monstrosity. And looking at the age on the wiki, Kyle was only 5 years old when he got springlocked, which is absolutely just horrible. God, that sucks. That would be rough. I would be offended if that happened to me. Like, yo, I'm only 5. What did I do to deserve this? And at 7, Am I Real? Am I Real, also known as Cake Bear, is presumably the primary and most recurring antagonist in Dormitibus. Am I Real has 2 different forms. His first form is Cake Bear. Cake Bear's design originated from the Save Him minigame, where he delivered cake to children while a child is killed outside. He is also the predecessor to both Fredbear and Freddy Fazbear. Cake Bear is a brown bear animatronic that also acts as a Springlock suit that appears in most of the main nights. Although they look slightly similar, the only similarities that he has to Freddy Fazbear is that they're both bears, and they wear a top hat, are brown, and have blue eyes. That's about it. Am I Real's second form is Am I Real, and is a form that resembles Springtrap. This form has a green color much like Springtrap and contains human remains, because of course it does. His right eye socket has gotten bigger on the side, and a big hole can be seen on the right side of his head. His top hat has received some withering on it as well, and his lower jaw is slanted and worn down. No longer circular like Cake Bear's. He has a sizable hole in the right side of his torso, revealing organs inside. Rips and tears also cover his arms, revealing even more human remains. He appears to be missing at least 1 finger on his right hand and is absolutely terrifying to look at. Of course, a decent amount of these are going to be from Dormitibus, because like, have you seen the Dormitibus animatronics? They're just horrifying. Speaking of which, in at number 6, Garvey, a psychopathic, cold-blooded killer. He stopped being human long ago. That's how Garvey is described in the extras of Dormitibus, the game from which he hails. Garvey is the penultimate antagonist to Dormitibus, and as a human, he was a man who killed the missing children, and later went on to get trapped in Spring Bonnie, becoming Springtrap, and then was burnt to a permanent death in the Fazbear Frights fire. That's where these two differ, okay? Garvey is a much more gory version of Springtrap from FNAF 3, and one that actually dies. However, it is not William Afton, as this game was released before the name reveal, so even before FNAF 4. Springtrap, but with hardly any exosuit or animatronic casing, whatever you want to call it, right? He crawls on all fours, uses his left hand as a foot and his left foot as a hand, like some demon crab thing that I did not want in my life. Okay, like, just look at this thing and tell me that it's right. You'll be lying. You're wrong if you think that this is okay. Halfway through into number 5, Bread Bear. Bread Bear is an animatronic coming from the Day Shift at Freddy series, who was created by Dave by modifying a Fredbear suit. The character appears in Day Shift at Freddy's 1, 2, and 3. Bread Bear's appearance is oddly similar to Fredbear, albeit wider, I guess because of the gluten. He is a golden colored bear animatronic wearing a purple top hat and bow tie, and 2 black and white buttons on his chest. He has gray metallic eyes, thicker arms and legs, a squarish brown nose, small brown pupils, small white teeth, round ears, with the insides being a lighter shade of color, and a very circular shaped stomach with brownish shades scattered amongst it. He has rips around his feet joints and arm joints, and he appears for real when Dave modifies an empty Fredbear suit and unleashes it during the Sting operation on Friday, in which, depending on which route you took, it either attempts to kill Jack, dies, or it destroys the entire pizza joint and then sets itself on fire. And you know what? We love that. We love the chutzpah. That's the kind of tactics we need in this cutthroat animatronic world. Coming in at 4, Shadow Spring Bonnie. Shadow Spring Bonnie is one of the 2 primary antagonists of Final Nights 2. He is also one of the final animatronics in that game. Shadow Spring Bonnie resembles Springtrap, as to be expected when mentioning Springlock suits, and similar to Springtrap, he lacks the suit on his feet and has the majority of his right ear missing. But overall, he has rips, but is not really missing any limbs or parts at all, which is a stark contrast to the burnt animatronics from the first 4 nights of Final Nights 2. His face glows white, which is notable when he is in the hallway, but also gives him a more sinister appearance, and pushes the something supernatural idea that most of these animatronics have, well, the shadow ones at least. Like Shadow Bonnie from FNAF AR, okay? It's something like the Winchesters are gonna have to hunt. Well, Winchester. Shadow Spring Bonnie takes on the role of Burnt Freddy and Burnt Foxy on night 5. He is very fast, so the player must seal the vent quickly, otherwise they'll get jump scared, and he can also appear in the hallway. Never use the flashlight though, or you will get insta-gibbed. Also, if he appears in the hallway, inspect his face, okay? If he's twitching, close the door, then a rattling sound will let you know when he's left, but if he's not twitching, don't. Okay, the fact that you need to look at his face to actually like kind of focus on it just makes him worse, okay? I don't like looking at faces, okay? I'm an antisocial person. Getting close to the end, in at number 3, Reaper Spring Bonnie. Reaper Spring Bonnie, however, is the opposite of Shadow Spring Bonnie. This Reaper variant appears in Final Nights 3 and 4 and is an absolute monstrosity, but is definitely more terrifying in Final Nights 4, okay? He is 100% the scariest animatronic in those games. In essence, Reaper Spring Bonnie is a nightmare Springtrap. He has sharp teeth and a very damaged and withered body. His suit is a dark yellow in color. He sports a big purple bow tie on his upper chest, kind of like Glitch Trap does, which is ironic given that this released first, I'm pretty sure. And like other Reaper animatronics, Reaper Spring Bonnie has a pair of hollow dark eyes, kind of like my ex. In Final Nights 4, however, his appearance is much more disfigured and gruesome, with sharper teeth, sharper claws, a different jaw, growths resembling kind of shoulder pads made of fungi, and a gooier appearance overall. He's also missing half of his right ear, kind of like Springtrap. I mean, like, that's kind of like a given at this point. Like, if you're missing half your ear, it's a reference to Springtrap. But oh my god, okay, this thing is more terrifying than Springtrap. Like, this is what Springtrap should have been. Or honestly, what I think a nightmare Springtrap would look like I said. This is like a prototype burn trap in my eyes, or like a melt trap, which is probably going to be the next iteration of Afton. Proto Trap, though, that's a good one. And ultimately, in at number 2, you! Spoiler alert for a fan game, but if I say which fan game, I'm going to spoil it. So if you want to avoid spoilers, click array right now. You can probably just skip to the next number using the timestamps, okay? Alright. I'll give you a chance to do that, and okay, that's your chance. That's it. You're done. Okay. A Shadow Over Freddy's is a FNAF fan game created by Fiznom on Game Jolt. It was released on the 25th of April 2018, and since it was made by the same guy who's currently working on FNAF Plus for the Fazbear fanverse, you know it's bound to be good. The gameplay of Ace Off is a hybrid between the traditional point-and-click game and a free-roaming horror game. The player wakes up to find themselves with no memories in a black and white abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and is tasked with surviving 5 nights and escaping the restaurant. The player is given a different task each night that they must complete before 6 a.m. and without being attacked by any roaming animatronics, obviously. However, the ending to the game has you getting trapped in a Springlock suit and being left to rot, meaning that you are a Springlock animatronic, which is probably one of the scariest things of all, because I don't know you, but like I'd rather not get Springlocked. It's also revealed that you then play as Afton, so it's kind of a fan character, kind of not, but like it's a fan way of having it happen. All right, good enough for me. And finally, in at number 1, Fred Trap. To be honest, I searched this up just for the hell of it because like originally we thought that Afton was using the golden Freddy suit to kill people, but there are actually Fredbear versions of Springtrap. Fredbear is exactly what you'd expect. Springtrap's look on a yellow Freddy animatronic. The designs are actually really well made and honestly scarier than normal Springtrap for me, and like I don't know why. I guess like for some reason when I just think bears are scarier than bunnies. I wonder why. I think that Scott made William use the Spring Bonnie suit because of how scared Scott was of Bonnie, but that's just idle speculation. That's like my kind of headcanon. There are also even more rundown versions and even scrap versions of Fred Trap, which are already haunting when you don't think about the fact that it would still be William inside the suit being kept alive by the spirit of his dead son. Fred Trap is definitely one of the most strangely horrifying versions of Fredbear or any Springlock animatronic that I've seen. And that's pretty damn impressive. In at 10, Springtrap. I believe we all know this story by now, okay? Everything was going well at first, they couldn't pin him down, and he was on his way to immortality. Once William discovered Remnant, however, he spiraled. He wanted to use it to fuel his life and make him truly immortal. So, in an effort to study it further, William lures the possessed animatronics to a back room that they can't normally access, and then uses it to dismantle them, planning to melt down their endoskeletons to make soul-infused metal. However, by doing this, he unknowingly releases the souls of the victims that he claimed so long ago. And seeing these victims causes William to panic. Understandably, I mean, they're freaking ghost kids and they're also the ghosts of kids that you killed. So, yeah, then this absolute animatronic genius, the technician that has made the suits, handles the suit maintenance, and explained to every employee the proper procedure for putting these Springlock suits on, climbs into the Spring Bonnie suit that he actually uses to kill, and then climbs inside in such a panic that he actually didn't notice the moisture in the room, the leaking ceiling, and, you know, literally everything else, probably also his sweat, which caused the Springlocks that were active in this moment, since it was in suit mode, to fail. And I feel like that moment is the one of the most confusing mysteries. Why did he do that? He knows better. If he can avoid the cops for that long, why did he think that this was all just gonna be fine? Dude. In and on Cassidy. Cassidy is the most mysterious victim in the missing children's incident. Okay, her name was hidden for years, only being revealed in the survival logbook and then confirmed in the FNAF movie script Scott talked about in a post on Reddit. That script though was ultimately scrapped. And honestly, we don't really know much about her. We don't know how she died, and there are plenty of theories that claim to have evidence of her being a Springlock victim. Maybe William knew that that would be an easier way than just, I don't know, a knife. I mean, after all, she does possess Golden Freddy, and some figure that he could be a Springlock suit that had the guts removed, hence the slumped over nature in his FNAF 1 and 2 forms. However, if this was the case, and Cassidy's body was in that suit, wouldn't they have found it when they were gutting the animatronic? But maybe, then again, William was the one who gutted it, considering how he was the suit technician. For a suit technician though, he did miss a fatal flaw with the animatronics he literally designed, since he got in the suit when it was wet like we just talked about. But either way, Cassidy being a Springlock victim could be true, but it's still a mystery. At least until Scott acknowledges the idea. Until then, it's just a theory, so don't go around saying that it's fact. It's a mystery. We don't know. And at 8, Kelsey. Kelsey is in essence the main antagonist of the Fazbear Frights story The New Kid from the 3rd Fazbear Frights book 135 AM. Kelsey had just moved to town and ends up becoming friends with the main protagonist, Devin. Devin ends up getting jealous of how much everyone loves Kelsey though, so he hatches a plan with his other friend to trap Kelsey in a Springlock suit for a few hours. However, when they unleash their plan, the Springlock suit fails and kills Kelsey. I mean, if you're going to trap him in a Springlock suit, I mean, isn't that isn't that how you would have trapped him normally? I didn't think you really thought that plan through. But at least they thought it killed him. Since a week later, Devin returns to make sure that Kelsey is still in there, only to find a different body in the suit. He knows that it's someone else because the hair color is different. And then Devin gets stuck inside the suit because he reached his arm in and then he bleeds out. Only for the story to cut back to Kelsey meeting 2 more kids at his new school. It is definitely an interesting story because while Kelsey did get Springlock, he ended up being fine. So what really happened? Some think that Kelsey is a ghost, some think that he's supposed to be the one you should not have killed, but no matter what, we all feel like that there's a high possibility that Kelsey was a Springlock victim, or you should have been, but we don't know how and we don't know when, but I mean it's still a definite possibility, which makes it a mystery. Not really an impactful one though, so in at 8 it goes. In at 7, Henry Emily. Now this is certainly an interesting case because seemingly Henry has died multiple ways across FNAF canons, with his first apparent death being in FNAF World at the hands of Baby. His death in the novels seems to have happened before the Silver Eye starts, and then he dies in FNAF 6 along with everything else. But could one of these deaths involve a Springlock failure or something having to do with Springlocks? I mean, maybe Afton offed Henry in one of these realities, finally actually, you know, took care of his worst enemy, or maybe Baby has some Springlock mechanisms that's inside of her that she used to kill Henry. I mean, hell, maybe Henry just climbed into the wrong suit at the wrong time, or maybe the right suit at the right time for him. It's a question that we don't really pay attention to because, I mean, Henry's death doesn't mean much to the story, unfortunately. I mean, it's true, it doesn't. Henry dying doesn't really mean much overall for the FNAF lore, okay? We didn't even know that he was alive until FNAF 6, for God's sakes. So maybe for irony's sake, Scott had him bite the dust in a quicker way rather than just burning him alive. And at 6, Phone Guy. Phone Guy's death is one of the most mysterious deaths of all time, okay? We hear him die in FNAF 1 on night 4 with the sounds of multiple animatronics banging at his doors, but we never really get an explanation as to what happens to him. We know that he dies, but other than that, it's all speculation. One of the theories is that the animatronics got him and shoved him into a suit, resulting in a painful death, especially since at this point the Springlock suits were either still in operation or hadn't been totally removed. The actual timeline of events for the Springlock suits is a little messy since we don't really have the exact years for the things getting scrapped, yet it's still possible that Phone Guy was shoved into one, or maybe he tried to use it to hide. After all, maybe Phone Guy is secretly William Afton and Scott just doesn't want us to know that yet or something, and what we hear could just be the FNAF 3 cutscene. I mean, I doubt it, but it would be absolutely hilarious if he ended up pulling that on us, okay? And for all those saying that Phone Guy can't be Afton because Afton is British or whatever, so is Tom Holland, okay? It's called acting. you can fake an accent, especially if you're a serial killer who's trying to evade everything, you know? Kinda, yeah, it's a thing. Halfway through in number 5, crying child. Okay, now this one is certainly going to get at least a little controversial, but there is no way that I could do this list without mentioning one of the greatest debates of my Instagram DMs ever. The amount of people who message me on Instagram not asking about literally anything else aside from the bite of 83 and how it had to have been the Springlocks kind of bothers me, and it does so to my core, okay? I say it every time that I brought it up, but it couldn't have been a Springlock failure. That being said though, if it is possible, that's kind of what this list is talking about, mysteries, who knows? The reason I don't think it was a Springlock failure is because the Fredbear suit was already in animatronic mode, meaning that no Springlocks would have had the chance to fail, since keeping in mind a Springlock failure refers to the Springlock mechanisms used to move the robotic parts failing, meaning that all the actual like endoskeleton bits snap back into where they should have been, and that's why if someone's inside, that's a bad thing, you know, because you don't want to really be sharing your bone bits with metal bits, and there also would have been no Springlock mechanisms inside the mouth because there's no robotic bits between the jaws. But again, that's the whole thing. The jaw just moves up and down. But still, it's a possibility since logic and physics doesn't really seem to apply to the FNAF world, which is made evident by those goddamn doors from FNAF 1. Even if they're supposed to be electromagnets, they would only open with power, I'm just saying, okay? Maybe Scott intended it to be a Springlock failure, but he just showed it in literally the worst way possible. I don't know. In at 4, the bite of 87. The bite of 87 is such an infamous incident that I can already hear people groaning in the comments. However, what if the victim of the bite of 87, whoever that was, is actually a victim of a Springlock failure? It could make sense since the animatronics had no real harmful tendencies before this, so a Springlock failure is a reasonable assumption as to why someone got a frontal lobe removed. And a Springlock failure would definitely provide enough power to do that, since, you know, the Springlocks themselves would snap with a ferocious velocity, and would probably circumvent the whole needing more power to actually crush a skull thing. And if it was Jeremy, it would explain why the animatronics ended up getting suspended, because now one of their own employees was bit and then they had to promote him and then fork over some extra cash to make sure that he didn't sue. So yeah, was the bite of 87 a Springlock failure? Maybe. And was it the moment that caused the Springlock suits to be retired? I don't know. Okay, it also could have been the FNAF 4 bite. But considering the FNAF 3 phone calls, it actually seems to be this bite though, since in FNAF 2 we hear about someone using one of the yellow suits and not mentioning the Springlocks until FNAF 3, meaning that they were probably still in use normally come 1985, and Crying Child died in 1983, so it was probably the bite of 87 that got them suspended, so there you go. Getting close to the end, in number 3, Golden Fredbear. One theory I've seen plenty of times, and I'm pretty sure was mostly the start of FNAF 4 theory, was that Golden Freddy and Fredbear are the same animatronic, suggesting that the reason Golden Freddy is all limp in the original FNAF and FNAF 2 is because his endoskeleton was removed after Crying Child's bite in 1983, and that's why the suit has to teleport around and cause hallucinations, because it can't actually move. This would also probably mean that Crying Child was the one in the Golden Freddy suit. However, we know that this isn't true based on the characters being separate in Ultimate Custom Night and not just coloring and size, since Golden Freddy is much smaller than Fredbear would have been, since, you know, Fredbear would have to accommodate a human and Golden Freddy wouldn't, since he would just be an animatronic and not a Springlock suit. But honestly, at this point, the actual design doesn't really seem to matter, since Springtrap went to Scrap Trap and then to Burn Trap, so honestly, it's all up in the air. However, I have yet to see proper substantial evidence of this being the case, and I don't think that they would have removed the endoskeleton before that. But ultimately, in number 2, Shadow Animatronics. One of the oldest theories is that the Shadow Animatronics are the first Springlock victims, and this comes to us after the FNAF 3 phone guide dialogue that mentioned multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures, which some interpreted as multiple Springlock suits failing at once, since the term Springlock in this situation is being used to describe the suit as a whole and not the actual individual mechanisms that make up the suit. So, the line of multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures could mean multiple of the Springlocks inside the suit failing at the same time, or just multiple suits failing. This led some to theorize that previous employees were killed in the Springlock suit, which is where the Shadow Animatronics come from. This is supported by the fact that these are both shadows of Freddy and Bonnie, the two animatronics that have Springlock versions. I mean, there are some holes in this theory, because, you know, one of them looks like Toy Bonnie, and Toy Bonnie's not a Springlock suit, but there is potential that this is the case, because again, designs consist consistency doesn't really seem to matter anymore. And finally, in at number 1, Double Trouble. Could William have suffered a springlock failure before getting trapped in the springlock Bonnie suit that we see in FNAF 3? It is possible, okay, and it certainly appears like this could be the case in the FNAF novels. Well, it is the case in the FNAF novels, but because of that, it could be the case in the games. Since William in the books is described to have scars that are consistent with a springlock failure before actually becoming Springtrap in the books. So, could it have happened in the games? Could William have been the reason that the springlock suits were actually retired? Since we do hear of the unfortunate incident at a sister location, so is that unfortunate incident instead William? There are plenty of people that it could be, but William having to deal with it would certainly get them put out of commission, because, you know, he's kind of up there, and I mean, he doesn't really seem to care about anyone else, so if they failed on them, why would he retire them? But with William continuing to use the suit and putting it on after, you know, when like the room was wet in FNAF 3, this could be unlikely unless he just doesn't have the capacity for trauma, but it's still possible either way, okay? So since this list is about mysteries, I feel like this deserves to be on it. And you know what? Be the capstone. And at 10 second times the charm. Could William have suffered a springlock failure before getting trapped in the spring Bonnie suit like we see happen in FNAF 3? In a way it's possible, and it appears like that's the case in the FNAF novels, since William is described as having scars that are consistent with a springlock failure before becoming Springtrap in the books. So could it have happened in the games? Could William have been the reason the springlock suits were retired in the first place, since we hear of an unfortunate incident at the sister location? So is that unfortunate incident actually William? There are plenty of other people that it could be as well, but William having to deal with it would certainly get them put out of commission, at least for a time. But with William continuing to use the suits afterwards and putting it on like we hear in FNAF 3, and then again he ends up failing in FNAF 3 as well, it's unlikely, so no. And at 9, Golden Fredbear. One theory that I've seen plenty of times, and I'm pretty sure mostly started around FNAF 4, was that Golden Freddy and Fredbear are the same animatronic, suggesting that the reason Golden Freddy is all limp and lifeless in the original FNAF and FNAF 2 is because his endoskeleton was removed after Crying Child's bite in 1983, and that's why the suit has to teleport around and cause hallucinations, because it can't physically move. This would also probably mean that Crying Child would be the one in the Golden Freddy suit. However, we know that this isn't true, based on characters being separate in Ultimate Custom Night, although I guess that might not mean much, and just like coloring and size. Since Golden Freddy is much smaller than Fredbear would have to be, since Fredbear would have to accommodate a human plus the robot parts, and Golden Freddy wouldn't, since, you know, Golden Freddy would just be an animatronic and not a springlock suit. But honestly, at this point, the actual design doesn't really seem to matter much apparently, since Springtrap went to Scrap Trap and then went to Burn Trap. But from the evidence, it seems like Golden Freddy is merely an illusion or a hallucination created in the mind of Michael Afton. See our Golden Freddy was never real video for more info on that, because that proves this idea wrong. And you're all gonna be mad at me, but you know what? That video deserves more love, or at least interaction. And at 8, Elizabeth Afton. I've seen a few people asking if or assuming that Elizabeth Afton was a victim of a springlock failure, and the truth is, she wasn't. The Circus Baby animatronic isn't a springlock suit, since a springlock suit in this case is defined as a suit that contains robotic parts, but uses a special mechanism that when cranked moves those robotic parts to the side so that a person can climb inside and wear the robot like a suit. The baby animatronic isn't one of those, because there's no way to actually wear this animatronic. Baby it's just a robot, so there is no way that she could have springlocked Elizabeth. Elizabeth is just a normal victim of her father's killing spree, which resulted in her somehow wanting to make him proud, despite him being the reason she's dead. Directly. Like, not even an, he just because he made the animatronic thing. No. Nobody else had a hand in her death aside from him. But she still wants to make him proud. I don't know. I guess Baby crushed her body and then her sanity too. Which, I mean, I'd understand. That's pretty rough. And at 7, Kelsey. The New Kid from 1:35 AM is a story from 3rd Fazbear Frights book. The story revolves around Devin, Mick, and Kelsey. Devin and Mick are outcasts. They aren't really popular, you know, they aren't cool. But when the new kid Kelsey arrives at their school, they try to make a new friend. Despite Kelsey being charismatic and adored by everyone in the school, over time Devin grows jealous of Kelsey, because, you know, he's adored and loved by everyone in the school. So, in an act of revenge, or to maybe try to gain control over him, Devin hatches a plan to lure Kelsey to an abandoned Freddy Fazbear's to trap him in a springlock suit for a few hours. I guess to try to humble him, I guess. I don't know why you thought that this would be a good thing, but obviously the plan goes horribly wrong because it's a FNAF book. After getting in the suit, the Springlocks ended up failing, as expected, because it's a FNAF book, causing all of the blood to soak into the fur of the animatronic and pool around the ground. Devin and Mick leave Kelsey for dead so that they won't get in trouble, but then something doesn't feel right. So a week later, Devin returns to the scene of the crime to make sure Kelsey's body is still there. He sticks his hand in the animatronic's mouth because he doesn't think about fingerprints, and snap. The Springlocks fail yet again, as per usual, and Devin gets his hand stuck inside the suit and bleeds out, but not before seeing a body in the suit with black hair instead of Kelsey's blonde hair. I don't know, okay? Could this be a character that we have yet to see in the games? Probably not. It's just a character in the book, alright? This doesn't happen in the games, okay? It's a myth. This is just a book thing, okay? Stop. And it's 6, unintentional. You see, there are a decent amount of people that for some reason think that these Springlock suits were made with pure intentions by William Afton. This kind of goes hand in hand with the idea that William started killing after losing his kids, but we know that that is not the case. Since thanks to the fast facts found in FNAF AR's files, we know that the Funtime animatronics were some of the first ones ever made. And considering the abilities of Baby, at the very least, we know that these were made in order to kill. We know that was a thought in his brain, meaning that even if the Springlock animatronics were the very first animatronics ever, it's reasonable to think that they were also designed with death in mind, which explains multiple things. More on one of them in a minute, but honestly, if William made the Funtimes with death in mind, it's likely that he did the same with the Springlocks. And if you think that a suit that can snap at a moment's notice and shove pounds of metal bars, cogs, gears, and more into the same place your body would take up, was made with pure intentions, then you need therapy more than I do, okay? I have some numbers you can call. Especially when a normal animatronic and then a suit for your employees would be cheaper and less likely the focus of a lawsuit. Speaking of which, halfway through into number 5, liability. The Springlock mechanism is probably the most intuitive thing that FNAF's world invented. The ability to move robotic parts out of the way with enough room for a human to fit inside is insane, and while it may be dangerous, we also drive over 100 kilometers an hour in huge giant metal death boxes, so maybe we can't really complain. While yes, they do have their faults, there's nothing compared to the ability to be both animatronic and human suit. It's an incredible feat of technology, even if just absolutely the dumbest idea ever. Because it's terrifying for the same reasons that it would be in game. Someone can dress in it and pretend to be a robot, okay? It can clamp down on you at any second, and it has done so multiple times before. The Springlock suits themselves are an occupational hazard that they did not need to end up creating, but like, I don't know, like these things are so hella deadly. Why would both William and Henry allow for their employees to wear them? Especially Henry, like goddamn. Just make a separate suit for the animatronic, okay? Like make a separate suit that your employee can wear. It's the employees, the people who run your business. They make you money, so you know they don't end up dying from robotic bits replacing their normal human organic bits in a hot suit that fails when it gets moist. Sweat, breathing. Yeah, I would never get in one of those things. Even if there hadn't been an incident before, okay, that just seems like a lawsuit waiting to happen. And I don't want to be the one whose family sues because I'm too dead to do it myself, alright? So, no. It's a myth that they shouldn't have gotten sued. In a 4, crying child. Okay, now this one's certainly gonna make people mad, but there's no way that I could do this list without mentioning the greatest debate of literally anyone yelling at me ever. The amount of people who have messaged me on Instagram or on TikTok yelling at me in my TikTok comments or in the YouTube comments telling me that the bite of 83 is somehow a Springlock incident bothers me to my core. I say this every time I bring it up. It's not a Springlock failure, okay? The fact that a load of people consider this to be a Springlock failure is the myth that I'm addressing. The reason I don't think it was a Springlock failure is because the Fredbear suit was already in animatronic mode, okay? There's no Springlocks that could have a chance of failing, since, a Springlock failure refers to the Springlock mechanisms failing to hold the robotic bits away, meaning that it snaps back into animatronic mode when a person's inside. That's why it's bad if there's a person inside, and there would be no Springlock mechanisms inside the mouth either, because that would always be in animatronic mode. Like your head, your eyes would line up with the opening of the mouth so that you could see. So yeah, that's kind of. Plus, I don't think anyone who is 7 feet tall working at Freddy Fazbear's. No, they're in the NBA. The jaw also just moves up and down, okay? Truthfully, I don't know how much of the community believes this to be a Springlock incident, because the comments are always going to be filled with more people that are against it than for it, because if you're for it, you don't really feel the need to comment about it. But it's still concerning the amount of comments I'm seeing and the amount of DMs I get on Instagram, okay? Which, by the way, follow me on if you don't hate me, because I need to get past 20. I get to 19 and it goes back down. I need to get past the 120, you know? Getting close to the end of number 3, not beefed up. The fact that these animatronics are incredibly powerful is absolutely an insane thing that nobody really seems to grasp. Like the fact that Fredbear was able to crush a child's skull, something that we've covered how crazy is. Imagine if that was an employee, okay? Like, ignoring the fact that you think it's a Springlock incident or that it's a Springlock suit, the amount of power that jaw has is a hazard for everyone who comes into contact with it. Like, goddamn. And before you say anything, okay, it wasn't a Springlock failure. I don't know how many times I need to go over that. There's no Springlocks in the mouth, and they weren't active at the time. Okay? It can't be a Springlock failure. So these animatronics are just insanely powerful animatronics, alright? Which would be explained by them being intended to kill, which also explains why it would have the power to crush crying child's skull. The way I see it, William probably wanted to use the Fredbear suit as his kill suit because, you know, Freddy's the more popular character, but then he had to change to Bonnie after, you know, his son was killed in the suit, especially considering how he saw Elizabeth end up possessing Baby, so he was probably worried that Crying Child did the same with Fredbear, so yeah, that's the way I see it. But ultimately, in number 2, Springlocks are real. Okay, you see, if I was to actually do like a cosplay of the purple guy and actually do it without it being a joke, I'd probably end up using a purple phone case, because, you know, you gotta reference the phone guy. But I don't need a Springlock crank, because those aren't actually a thing in real life. While the term Springlock is used in real life, it is a totally different mechanism from the actual FNAF thing, okay? I'm certain most of you got the whole Springlocks are real line from the Springlocks and You How Not to Die Remastered thread on the FNAF wiki. However, actual Springlocks are just locks that use springs. From my research, what I gathered was that a Springlock in real life is in the simplest of terms if your front door's deadbolt was on a spring. Every other instance talking about real Springlocks just simply brings you back to that page or quotes that page, so there's really only one source. Springlocks, as they're used in the games, do not exist in real life, alright? That is a myth. The term is used, but it's 2 separate words instead of one, and they mean totally different things. So please stop. And finally, in at number 1, Cassidy. Cassidy is the most mysterious victim in the missing children's incident. Her name was hidden for years, only being revealed in the survival logbook of all things, and then confirmed in the FNAF movie scripts that Scott ended up tossing after he talked about them on Reddit. And honestly, we don't really know much about her. We don't know how she died, but there are plenty of theories that claim to have evidence of her being a Springlock victim. Maybe William knew that it would be easier that way, I don't know. Maybe she ends up possessing Golden Freddy after all, I don't know, okay? We figured that he could be a Springlock suit and then that he had like the guts removed or something like that, hence the slumped over nature as I talked about earlier, but if this was the case and Cassidy's body was in that suit, wouldn't they have found it when they were gutting it? Because like, that seems like something you'd notice. I don't know, but maybe William was the one who gutted it, considering how he was the suit technician. But for a suit technician, he also did, you know, get into the animatronic when it was wet, something that he was definitely smart enough to avoid. But yeah, Cassidy being a Springlock victim has very little evidence, if you can even call it evidence though, so yeah, I'm definitely gonna deem this one a myth. Light your torches, get your pitchforks, come at me in the comments section for saying that, because I know you're going to. I can't avoid it every time, but you're not going to change the outcome of this video, alright? It's already uploaded, you can't change it, it's too late.
Number 10, Springlock doors. Something that has come up multiple times over the course of all of these games, a question that still has yet to be answered, is how do the doors open if the power turns off, considering that they're mechanical doors? Well, what if the doors are actually spring-loaded and it's the power that holds them in place, and then when they turn off, they just snap upwards, I guess. The other strange thing in general about the doors is that they slide upwards, not sideways. That just means those straight looking sheets of metal are actually able to curl up somehow, being stored in the ceiling like a garage door, although I don't think that's what's happening, or that there is a wall directly above for that door to slide into, which would be a lot of convenient wall stacking, especially if this is a one-level building. Then it really doesn't make sense. Either way, I can only imagine that these doors would even be capable of springing open if it was the power alone keeping them shut, and that they are somehow spring-loaded to always be open, unless the power is on to push them down. That's the only way we can rationalize the way they work. Maybe this is also why our power runs out so fast as well. After all, I'm assuming it would take quite a bit of force and therefore power to keep them in place if they were spring-loaded. Number 9. Kelsey is Andrew. Kelsey is the new kid in one of the stories from Fazbear Frights, number 3, 1:35 AM. Coincidentally, I think one of my favorite books in the Fazbear Frights series. The story itself is also titled appropriately The New Kid. It centers around Kelsey, who is a new kid at school that everyone likes because he is so friendly and good looking. In the end, Kelsey ends up being betrayed by his new friends that he's made, who try to scare him by taking him to an abandoned Freddy's location and making him dance around in a Springlock golden Freddy suit, which of course malfunctions, killing him. Later on, one of the friends comes back for Kelsey only to get stuck in the suit himself and see a corpse inside that doesn't seem to match Kelsey's appearance. This corpse is noted as having black curly hair, which led many fans of the books to speculate that Kelsey is in fact the vengeful spirit Andrew, who also appears in another story later on in the book series, The Man in Room 1280 from the 5th Fazbear Frights book. In that story, the vengeful spirit, whom many believe to be Andrew, one of the spirits that possesses the Stitch Wraith, appears as a dark boy with curly hair wearing an alligator mask. With a description of his hair matching that of the corpse found inside the Springlock golden Freddy suit, it's easy to see why people think Kelsey is Andrew. And friends, before we move on to our next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists about all of the Springlocks, so many Springlock things, so springy, so locky, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Plush Trap is from Sister Location, and what's more, might also be an older model Springlock suit? Based on what Circus Baby says about the Springlock suit we are stuck in coming from her old location, we could theorize that Plush Trap is also a Sister Location Springlock suit, especially since Plush Trap looks much older by comparison. But why do we think Plush Trap is also a Springlock suit? Well, it's interesting that in the book Fetch, we learn more about the Plush Trap animatronic, where it is implied that it can mimic the voices of other folks, something that prior to Fetch's release, only Sister Location animatronics seemed to be capable of. This is what makes us think that Plush Trap comes from Sister Location and perhaps was an older animatronic brought over from Circus Baby's previous location. While Plush Trap doesn't really fit in with the overall aesthetic of Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, we do know that an older Springlock suit was also kept there. Does that mean that Plush Trap is also an old Springlock that initially was its sister location, just based on the voice mimicking? If so, how did they get to be with the Nightmare animatronics? And also, who wore the Plush Trap suits if they were ever worn, if they were Springlocks in that way? Was it designed for a shorter employee or possibly for kids to wear? Also, just to be clear, I'm not implying that that is the Springlock suit that we are in Sister Location when you're playing the game, because yeah. I don't know how tall Michael Afton is, but I don't think he's as small as Plush Trap. Number 7. Kelsey is Crying Child / Cassidy. While Kelsey being Andrew could make some sense, others have speculated that the corpse found inside the suit actually belongs to Cece, Crying Child. This is obviously because of the physical description of the corpse, which has curly black hair. A lot of people coming back to that curly black hair for a lot of these theories. This description matches the appearance of Crying Child, who also appears to have black and curly or wavy hair based on what we see in the games. But Kelsey is blonde. How does he fit in? Well, it is possible that Kelsey is the amalgamated manifestation of both Crying Child and Cassidy, who perhaps both haunt Golden Freddy if in this continuity they were both victims and have decided to share possession of the animatronic. Neither of them of course was blonde, but they could be changing their appearance together, using a disguise to go out in the world and trick bullies into trusting them. Cassidy could also possibly be considered the more aggressive personality, while Crying Child could be considered the nicer side, and also might bring the masculine appearance to the table when it comes to their disguise. Because obviously Cassidy was a girl, so yeah. Number 6. Shadow Freddy and RWQFSFASXC. I think I said that all right. This theory, I believe, has been debunked, so just a word to the wise about that, but I still thought it was a pretty cool theory that existed, and I personally like the sound of it. I think it's a neat theory, hence why I'm gonna share it here with you, even though it's been discredited. But just know, we know that. The theory posits that Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie were both victims of a Springlock failure. Phone Guy talks about the sister location experiencing multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures, leading some fans to think that might explain the shadow animatronics we see and what exactly they are. Spirits who are attached to the suits that they died in, but were for some reason unable to fully possess them, instead becoming a shadow-like version of that animatronic. I just think it's a cool idea. I mean, shadow animatronics are so mysterious to me, so when I find cool stories that could explain how they work, their theories, I love them. Number 5. Yellow Suit. In FNAF 2 on night 6, Phone Guy's call reveals that he is surprised you came into work at the location, as it is meant to be shut down for a while. He tells you that there was an incident that happened involving the yellow suit in the back, which many have theorized to be the Springlock suit used in the missing children incident, where 5 victims went missing. Some even think that this phone call is referring to that incident. Phone Guy claims that someone wore the yellow suit, and ever since, the animatronics have been acting strangely. Is it because they had victims stuffed into them, and possibly because those victims' souls are making the animatronics behave more aggressively because they're possessing them? I don't know, but it makes sense. Number 4. Bite of 83. We know that Fredbear was the one behind the Bite of 83 based on the minigames we see in FNAF 4, and we also know that CC was the victim of said bite and eventually died of his injuries. But what we don't know is why the bite happened. However, if you look deep into the lore surrounding Springlocks, it feels like a no-brainer here. Sorry, no pun intended, crying child. Sorry about that. We already know that Springlock failures have pretty much been an ongoing problem since the creation of the suits, and we also know that Springlock failures on a massive scale eventually got these kinds of suits retired. So what if the Bite of 83 was the major beginning of that? What if the bite happened because of a Springlock failure itself? All the clues seem to be pointing us in this direction. A technical issue is the only real explanation, is the animatronics themselves seem to have not been inherently malicious, not until they were bonded with spirits which lingered inside them, making them vengeful. And so if there wasn't a spirit in there, then we must assume there was a technical error, a Springlock malfunction. Number 3. Funtime Bonnie is a Springlock suit. Funtime Bonnie really only appears in sister location as an empty head, but what if there is something else going on with this animatronic? After all, there is one animatronic who we also don't get a good look at in the game, but who we are pretty familiar with by the end of it, just based on our experiences. That would be the Springlock animatronic that we are stuck in temporarily. While we never see it explicitly, we also never get to see Funtime Bonnie explicitly either. This has led some to theorize that Funtime Bonnie is said Springlock suit and is the older animatronic that Circus Baby was referring to. The only thing that seems odd is how new we'd imagine Funtime Bonnie to look, but then again, it's more likely that the animatronics at sister location are actually really old and have just been well maintained and possibly refurbished, and possibly, you know, hidden away there. After all, Circus Baby's Pizza World seems to be one of the first locations, I think. This timeline is hard to keep track of, so forgive me if I'm wrong about something that has not actually been confirmed, so I guess we can't really be wrong about much. Number 2. Springlock suits were designed to malfunction. You have to wonder, when you learn how easy it is for a suit to malfunction, if the suits themselves were ever actually made with the intention of functioning in a safe manner. It seems more likely that they were made with the intention to do harm. The Springlocks can malfunction if not wound up securely and properly before the wearer dons the suit. Not winding up the springs properly can result in them simply going back to their original position, impaling the wearer. The thing that I find very suspicious is how a small amount of moisture, such as that which comes from heavy breathing or even just moisture in the air, can cause the spring locks to completely loosen. These are also suits that you'd think were intended for you to move around in, acting as the character you were dressed up as, and yet in sister location we are warned not to move too much, as this can actually set off the spring locks, implying either the locks were not at all secure when the suit was put on us, or that they are so temperamental that basic movements could set them off, never mind jumping around, dancing, or in general performing as the character that you happen to be dressed as, which is what I'd assume would be expected normally of an employee donning a mascot suit. Number 1. Henry sabotaged the Springlock suits. We don't really have a lot of clearly defined lore from the games that lets us know who really made all of the animatronics between William and his business partner Henry. In some continuities, it's implied that William is more the inventive one, whereas in others, William is more business savvy and Henry is more robotic savvy. It could be possible that the two were actually a little bit of both. I think that makes the most sense just based on everything we've learned about them. If this is the case, who's to say that Henry wasn't the one behind the Springlocks, and perhaps after losing his daughter, sabotaged said Springlock suits while in a vengeful state. When William, however, did not die from Springlocks impaling him, Henry had to resort to other means later down the road, like what we see in Pizzeria Simulator, with him rounding up all of the former animatronics and then burning the place to the ground. Or potentially with Henry being behind the burning down of Fazbear Fright, which also was a suspicious thing that happened, and we don't really know who's behind it, but I feel like Henry could make sense there.
And at 10, Crying Child. Okay, so I'm putting this one at number 10 because I personally don't think that the Crying Child is a Springlock victim. To me, there's just no logical way that that animatronic jaw should have crushed his skull, because, you know, the Springlocks were already active and that would require a lot of power to crush a skull anyway. However, it is possible that since this is a series about haunted animatronics possessed by spirit metal, that logic kinda gets thrown out the window. So assuming that he is a Springlock victim, that's brutally scary. Being thrown into an animatronic's mouth and crying so much that you make the jaw snap onto your own skull, killing you instantly? Holy crap, that is nightmare fuel. That's why some people are scared of robots or animatronics, and while it may not be realistic, the possibility of it happening is still horrifying to say the least, especially since not even that long ago he lost his sister to Circus Baby, and that's pretty messed up. And I'm sure that Michael, who put the kid in his mouth, as long as, you know, I'm wrong about my theory, he'd be scarred for life. And I think I would be too. Before we move on to number 9, can you do me a favor and smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't yet if you are looking forward to this list. I saw a load of comments asking for it, so this better not flop. If it flops, so help me, you will all have a reckoning. The more likes we get, the more likely we are to do a part 2, and it also helps us against the algorithm almighty and lets us grow the channel, which means more cool vids for you, so you know, it's a win-win, so thank you. And at 9, The Twisted Ones. The Twisted Ones novel starts a year after The Silver Eyes ended, with Charlie in university. One day, however, Clay Burke comes to see Charlie, and for some reason brings her to see a corpse with familiar wounds. This could either be because she would recognize them, or because she was working with the police, or because they had to advance the plot. I don't know, I haven't read the original novels, but I want to. However, looking at the wounds, she confirms that they are in fact a Springlock failure, meaning that we have an unnamed Springlock victim in the Twisted Ones novel. If this character does have a name, like if it's revealed in later down the line or something, please let me know, because I couldn't find one online. However, while this may seem insignificant to you, the real horror of this number comes from what it signifies. This Springlock marks the return of William Afton, since at the same time, Clay also tells her that a blood sample they took from Afton showed that the body was a fake, or at least it was fake blood. The return of a killer, and the purple guy of all of them, that's pretty damn scary if you ask me. And at 8, The New Kid. Continuing with the theme of FNAF books, what about the story The New Kid from 1:35 AM, the third Fazbear Frights book? The story revolves around Devon, Mick, and Kelsey. Devon and Mick are outcasts. They aren't popular, they aren't cool, but when the new kid Kelsey arrives at their school, they make a new friend, despite Kelsey being charismatic and adored by everyone else in the school. Over time though, Devon grows jealous of Kelsey, since Kelsey has everything that Devon wants. So in an act of revenge or to gain control, because you know that's kind of serial killery, Devon hatches a plan to lure Kelsey to an abandoned Freddy Fazbear's to trap him in a Springlock suit for a couple hours, to try to humble him, I guess. But the plan goes horribly wrong. After getting in the suit, the Springlocks fail, as expected, because you know this is a FNAF book, causing Kelsey's blood to soak into the fur of the animatronic and pool around the ground. Devon and Mick leave Kelsey for dead so that they won't get in trouble, but something doesn't feel right. So a week later, Devon returns to make sure that Kelsey's body is still there, for some reason. He sticks his hand into the animatronic's mouth to feel if it's there, and snap! The Springlocks fail yet again, as per usual, and Devon gets his hand stuck inside the suit and bleeds out, but not before seeing a body in the suit, but with black hair instead of Kelsey's blonde hair. If that's not scary, then you need to go see a doctor, because that's bone chilling. That's messed up. No. And at 7, Grim Fredbear. Grim Fredbear is one of the antagonists from Final Nights 3 Nightmares Awoken. He's only active on night 5 and found in the left hallway. Grim Fredbear resembles the normal golden Fredbear suit, only with his suit glowing a deep purple while the interior of the suit glows a bright white. His upper face appears to be torn off, including his eyes, leaving an empty, hollow, gaping hole in its place. The inside of the mask, though it appears like there's nothing really inside, actually conceals a white, pale human head that can only be seen during his jump scare. And before you ask, yes, it's mine. The animatronic is clearly meant to be a reference to Shadow Freddy and the theory that the Shadow animatronics were Springlock victims, which was later confirmed by Scott to be false when stating that William was the only victim of a Springlock failure. And in the museum level, which unlocks after night 5, it is revealed that Grim Fredbear is a Springlock victim, saying, quote, another Springlock failure victim, the second generation of Fredbear. And at 6, Grim Chica. The first Springlock victim in the Final Nights series, Grim Chica is a primary antagonist in Final Nights 3 Nightmares Awoken. Unlike others, she is not a Reaper animatronic. Grim Chica holds a strong appearance to the Springlock suit on the poster in the Night 3 cutscene, but her faceplates are very hard to spot and she's almost entirely purple. She really resembles Toy Chica. The glowing accents inside of her resemble a human corpse. She lacks a bib unlike the original Chica, and her overall body is very slim like the original Toy Chica, except for her hips, which appear to be much wider. Got the baby birth and hips. I regret that immediately. And she lacks shoulders or upper arms, with her forearms protruding from her armpits. Grim Chica is also revealed to be a Springlock victim in the museum level, saying, quote, a victim of a Springlock failure, forever forced to haunt the suit she is wearing, now being manipulated by your sister and mother. Tried spray on tan, still very pale. Why is that so relatable to me? Like, no matter what I do, I'll always be pale and pasty. Not the whole being manipulated by your sister and mother thing. That's weird. But like, I'm okay with forever being pasty. However, I did rank this above Grim Foxy because, like, it's Chica. And look what they did to my girl Chica. I'm sorry, Mommy Kentucky, for the transgressions. Halfway through in at number 5, Garvey. A psychopathic, cold-blooded killer. He stopped being human long ago. That's how Garvey is described in the extras of Dormitibus, the game from which he hails. Garvey is the penultimate antagonist of Dormitibus, and as a human, he was the man who murdered the missing children. He later went on to get trapped in Spring Bonnie, becoming Springtrap, and then was burnt to a permanent death in the Fazbear Frights fire. Garvey is a more gory version of Springtrap from FNAF 3. However, he is not William Afton, as the game was released before the name reveal, even before FNAF 4. Springtrap, but with hardly any exosuit or animatronic casing, whatever you want to call it. He crawls on all fours and uses his left hand as a foot and his left foot as a hand, like some demonic monkey from hell that Satan didn't sanction the creation of. Just look at this thing and tell me that it shouldn't be on this list. If you do, you'll be lying. And at 4, Golden Call. As a human, when alive, Golden Call's name was Kyle. However, he is now a Springlock victim stuck inside a Golden Freddy Springlock suit. Golden Call has the typical rundown Springlock suit vibe, similar to Springtrap. However, this is even more gruesome. His left ear is bent, he has guts coming out of basically every hole in his body, human eyes are hanging out of the animatronic's eye sockets. He's even missing exosuit on his right foot, and the character is holding a flesh-colored, at least it's flesh-colored, it may be even like fully like a flesh, phone in his right hand that stays stuck to his head via more flesh or blood strands connecting to the side of his head. It's horrifying, dude. This is a monstrosity. And looking at his age on the wiki, Kyle was only 5 when he got Springlocked, which is absolutely nuts and just flat out horrible. So unfortunate, man. He was supposed to be the next best Fortnite player. That's a joke for the long-term subs. You know it. And at 3, Am I Real? Am I Real, also known as Cake Bear, is presumably the primary and most recurrent antagonist in Dormitibus. Am I Real has 2 different forms. His first form is Cake Bear. Cake Bear's design originated from the Save Him minigame, where he delivered cake to children while a kid is murdered outside. He is the predecessor of both Fredbear and Freddy Fazbear. Cake Bear is a brown bear animatronic that also acts like a Springlock suit that appears in most of the main nights. Although they do look similar, the only similarities he has to Freddy Fazbear in reality is that they both possess a top hat, are brown, have blue eyes, and are a bear. And my real second form is a form that resembles Springtrap, however. This form has a green color much like Springtrap and contains human remains. His right eye socket has gotten bigger on the side and a big hole can be seen on the right side of his head. His top hat has received some withering on it as well, and his lower jaw is slanted and worn down, no longer circular like Cake Bear's. He also has a sizable hole in the right side of his torso, revealing organs. Ha, lovely. Rips and tears cover his arms, revealing more human remains. He also appears to be missing at least one finger on his right hand, and it's absolutely terrifying to look at. Of course, 3 out of 10 of these are going to be from Dromitibus. Like, what did you think was gonna happen? Did you watch the Dromitibus animatronics list? And ultimately, in at number 2, Springtrap. I believe we all know this story by now. Everything was going well at first. They couldn't pin him down and he was on his way to immortality. Once William discovered Remnant, however, he spiraled. He wanted to use it to fuel his life and make himself truly immortal. So in an effort to study it further, William lures possessed animatronics to the back room that they can't access and uses it to dismantle them, planning to melt down their endoskeletons to make soul-infused metal. However, by doing this, he unknowingly releases the souls of the victims he claimed oh so long ago. Shocked, he tries to scare them by getting into his spring Bonnie suit, which also coincidentally makes him feel more powerful. However, this haste coupled with the leaking in the back room causes the spring locks to fail, crushing him in torturous agony for the next 30 years. However, he didn't die from this. As we learn in the man in room 1280, he was being kept alive by the spirit of another victim. So he was living that agonizing pain for 30 years. And that makes him damn well deserving of the number 2 spot. And before you ask, no, him and Garvey are 2 separate characters, meaning that they can both be included on this list. You're welcome. Finally, in at number 1, you. A spoiler alert for a fan game, and if I say which fan game, it's going to spoil it. So if you want to avoid spoilers, click away now. And thanks for watching. I'll give you a chance to do that now. Okay, now that you've prepared for spoilers, A Shadow Over Freddy's is a FNAF fan game created by Fiznam on GameJolt. It released on April 25th, 2018, and since it was made by the same guy who is currently working on FNAF Plus for the Fazbear fanverse, you know it's bound to be good. The gameplay of A Shadow Over Freddy's is a hybrid between a traditional point-and-click game and a free-roaming horror game. The player wakes up to find themselves with no memories in a black and white abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and is tasked with surviving 5 nights in escaping the restaurant. The player is given a different task each night and must complete said task before 6 AM and without being attacked by any roaming animatronics. However, the ending of the game has you getting trapped in a Springlock suit and left to rot, meaning that you are a Springlock victim, which is probably the scariest victim of them all, cause I don't know about you, but I'd rather not get Springlocked. Although I know there are plenty of you that would just love that. You'd fill the suit with liquids that aren't blood, and that's messed up. Like, I'm not one for kink shaming, but yeah, there's kinks, and then there's like being killed, you know? I don't know how else to put that.